And now we're moving on to part 2 of hypothesis testing. As you can see, I selected the null hypothesis of p equals 0.67 and my alternate of p does not equal 0.67. And you'll notice that weird fish symbol is alpha and it equals 0.05, which is our significance level. What's going to happen when we do our hypothesis test is we're going to use that data of 458 out of 635 to show whether enough changes occurred to show that the percent is no longer 0.67. So when you use does not equal to, what's happening here is that number one is that we have a normal distribution. And the reason why that we have a normal distribution is because we have a big enough sample size. Our sample size is 635. And when I take that times 0.67 and then take 635 times what is that? 1 minus 0.67 is 33. Both of these are bigger than 10. And the central limit theorem from chapter 7 says that if these are both bigger than 10, then we can guarantee this is going on. And not only that, our fact is in the middle. Okay. So what that 458 out of 635 is that we already figured out that 458 out of 635 is approximately 72%. So what we're curious is that 72% here? So it's in the middle and close enough to 0.67 to be considered not unusual? Or is it in the tail? So is it far enough in the tail that it appears to be weird? How do we figure this out? Well, how we figure this out is by calculating the z-score, how many standard deviations away it is, and by using a p-value. Now, what that p-value is, so when I use StatCrunch in just a minute, the p-value that we're going to get is going to tell us how unusual it is. So the p-value is really the percent under the curve. Okay. Now what we're looking for is we want to know if that percent under the curve is smaller than 5% or if it's bigger than 5%. Why 5%? Because that's our kind of our measuring stick we always use is alpha is 0.05. So what I'm curious about when I go to StatCrunch in just a minute is I'm going to get a p-value. And if that number is less than 5%, that means it's weird. Something weird is going on here. If it's greater than 5%, that means that it is typical. Nothing unusual is going on. So what's happening is that p-value is going to tell me whether or not it's close to the middle and not weird and typical, or if it's in the tail. Now, the other thing you should be aware of is that when we use does not equal to, what it's really doing, even though we're just curious about this, technically, what this is doing is this is called a two-tail test. When you use does not equal to, it's actually doing a two-tail test to see what the p-value is. Okay, I know that part's a little bit confusing, but trust me, it's going to be okay. So what we're going to do for part 3 is we're going to go to StatCrunch and figure out what the p-value is to see if it's less than 5% and weird or bigger than 5% and typical. All right, that's part 2.